Terrifying last words people said right before passing away. An ER physician says he's heard many last words before, but this one was the most terrifying. There was a man who was taking his last breaths as he succumbed to renal failure. And right before he passed away, he said, "I see a bright light, horses, no eyes." Then he started screaming, "No, no, no." And as he yelled, he suddenly woke up, looked up towards the ceiling, and with his last breath said, "I understand." Then right after, he passed away. According to this ER physician, this could be provoked by certain neurotransmitters during organ failure. But sometimes he still thinks that maybe that patient saw more than we're led to believe. Let me know if I should make a part 2 and follow for more.
The Cheeto Dust Killer. February 9th, 2006. A witness watches a man in Taylorsville, Utah hold a bottle of Coke and a bag of Cheetos as he talks to 29-year-old Sonia Medja outside of her apartment. Suddenly, the man smacks Sonia hard on the head and forces both of them into the apartment. When Sonia's husband comes home, he finds the man's food outside the door. Inside the apartment, he finds Sonia stripped nude and strangled to death on the bed, and her body covered in Cheeto dust. Let's fast forward to February 9th, the same day, but a year later and only a mile away from the previous crime. An unknown man breaks into the apartment of Damiana Castillo and smothers her with a pillow. The investigators compared the two crimes and matched the DNA to the same man. Unfortunately, the judge has sealed the case, so the verdict is unknown. But what we do know is that police found the man who we call...
Okay, so I spent a lot of time reading about the dark side of Disney. And there was this period of time in the Disney parks known as the Dark Ages of Disney. It's known for being the bloodiest time in the park's history. It was a period of time from the mid-90s to the early 2000s where the park decided it wasn't going to maintain the rides anymore. They were only going to fix the rides after an accident happened, which I talk about today on the podcast, but I want to talk about specific instance. And that's the first big disaster they had, which was the Columbia ship disaster. So on Christmas Eve 1998, this ship was coming into this dock way too fast. And mind you, at the time, staff had been complaining about the ship for a while. It needed maintenance, but the park refused to maintain it. So as the ship's coming in too fast, this employee grabs a rope and ties it to this post. And what happens is the rope gets too taut, the ship keeps moving, and it rips a big metal cleat off the boat. The cleat whips around at like hyperspeed towards the crowd and hits Luan Dawson in the face. He died on the spot from a fractured skull, and his wife had to get rushed to the hospital for horrific facial trauma. It was so bad that apparently some of the people that just saw the accident happen had to go to the hospital. But in classic Disney fashion, there was a little bit of a cover-up. So these are investigators looking at the dock right after the accident happened, which you'll notice is very clean. And that's because when they arrived, Disney executives brought them all into a conference room for 4 hours while other Disney employees cleaned up the deck to make it look spotless. It was actually a while before the park had to admit fault and settle with Dawson's family for over $25 million, it's believed. But yeah, there's a lot more to the story, so check out the episode.
The chimney here that's pictured behind me is the site of one of the strangest mysteries in the true crime world. This was the location of where 18-year-old Joshua Maddox was found. To give you a bit of backstory about what makes this so strange is that Joshua went missing and his family never understood why. But this was in 2008. And the body was not discovered until 2015. The person who owns this abandoned cabin was going to demolish it when they knocked down the chimney, and that is where they found the body. Crammed inside, upside down in fetal position, were the skeletal remains of Joshua Maddox. By the way, if you're looking for a longer episode on this, we're probably going to cover it on Creep Time that you can always go listen to using the link that's right in my bio. What's so odd about the Joshua Maddox case is that the investigators ruled that this was some kind of an accident, that he had crawled down the chimney to break into this cabin for an unknown reason. There were several things with that story that didn't add up. One is to focus back on this chimney because the chimney had a grate on top of it, which would have made it impossible for someone of Joshua's size to get inside the chimney. Even stranger than that, Joshua was found inside the chimney wearing only his t-shirt. The rest of his clothing had been removed and was at the bottom of the fireplace. Something about that story just does not add up.
Jared Breitigan's ex-wife has finally been charged with his murder. If you know Jared's case, you know he was a Microsoft executive living in Jacksonville with his wife and 4 kids. 2 of those kids are twins he shared with his ex-wife Shanna, who divorced him after she cheated with her personal trainer. It had reportedly been an ongoing custody battle for years. We now know on February 16th, Jared was driving home from a custody exchange at Shanna's when he came across a tire in the middle of the road. He had his 2-year-old Bexley in the back seat, and his killer knew he would get out to clear the roadway. He was immediately shot to death at close range. that night, Jared's wife Kirsten, his ex-wife Shanna, and her new husband Mario would have been the only people to know his route. But when the first arrest came in the case 8 months ago, it was a man named Henry Tienon. As it turns out, Henry was renting a room from Mario in Jacksonville just before the murder, and with that, it became clear they had hired him to kill Jared. Come March, Mario too was arrested for his role in the case. And then this week, Shanna was too. She's charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and child abuse as she put Bexley in harm's way. She was indicted on Friday and in a rare move is actually fighting her extradition back to Florida from Washington. And if you've been following this case, you know this arrest was a long time coming. After Jared was killed, Shanna kept the twins home from his funeral and then moved them across the country to Washington. Since then, she has not once allowed them to see their siblings or Kirsten. As for what will happen to the twins, Kirsten very clearly wants to be reunited, but I don't know. This is the statement from Shanna's parents, the ones who went on vacation with Shanna, Mario, and the twins just after Jared was killed. For more details, updates, and what's going on with the twins, you can go to this page that Kirsten has made, Justice for Jared B.
Another shoe with a severed human foot in it has washed up on a beach in Western Canada. If you haven't heard of something similar before, this has been a trend actually in British Columbia for the past couple of decades. This map created by the provincial government that is available online shows where all these shoes and feet have washed up in BC. The first one was in August of 2007, and it has just been steady ever since. The government really started keeping track of this in 2007, like I said, when that first foot was found. And they've found feet from many different years. The earliest is all the way back in 1985. Most of these feet have actually been identified. They've linked them to missing people, which is interesting. The Pacific Ocean is such a vast place, so it's unlikely that all of these cases would be linked. However, people do have theories ranging from serial killers, foul play, to simply just accidents. Back when this first became known to the public around 2008, there was actually a hoax on Campbell River on Vancouver Island where someone put some animal bones inside a shoe and claimed to have found a human foot. This is still ongoing. The most recent foot washed up on a beach, Gonzales Beach in Victoria, BC in July of 2023, so very recent. They have not yet identified who the foot belongs to. Do you have any theories on what is really happening? Let me know, because
yesterday, Paul Flores, the man who murdered Kristen Smart at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in 1996, was attacked in prison. Flores was relocated to Pleasant Valley State Prison last week, and yesterday morning he was admitted into general population for the first time. Less than an hour after he went into Gen Pop, another inmate reportedly slit his throat. He reportedly experienced substantial blood loss as the result of multiple severe lacerations to his neck. He was airlifted to a trauma center in Fresno, California, where he was stabilized, but he remains in serious condition. The Department of Corrections didn't confirm that Flores had been attacked, and a spokeswoman said via email that the circumstances surrounding the injury were under investigation and that details wouldn't immediately be released. Flores' attorney, Harold Messick, said he was notified by corrections officials that Flores was attacked, but he didn't have any more details. Messick said, quote, "I just pray for his recovery." While no official details have been released, I think we can all kind of guess and have an idea of what happened. I wouldn't be surprised if the Department of Corrections doesn't release any more details, but we'll see if anything else comes out about this. And it'll be interesting to see whether or not he returns to general population after he recovers.
Why Lucy Lippy is even worse than we thought. Today, Lucy Lippy has been sentenced to life in prison. However, like the coward she is, she's refused to go to court where families of her victims will speak and the judge will officially pass the sentence. While she was secretly committing murders back in 2015 and 2016, multiple doctors at the hospital raised serious concerns after noticing a pattern where Lucy was always on shift any time a newborn would die or collapse. All those concerns raised by doctors were shunned and dismissed, and many doctors were ignored and penalised for raising concerns about Lucy. One doctor, Dr. Ravi, actually walked in on her attacking a newborn, but later was made to apologise to her because she didn't seem like the type. So now people are left wondering, how is someone who was clearly so dangerous was given the benefit of the doubt? Was it because she apparently didn't look like a serial killer despite all the evidence? Would the doctor's concerns be listened to if she didn't play the innocent white woman who's a victim of workplace bullying?
Brian Coburger, the suspect in the Idaho murder case, has waived his right to a speedy trial. His trial was set to begin on October 2nd, but now it is essentially postponed indefinitely. it could be years before this trial takes place. Coburger's attorney, Ann Taylor, said during a hearing yesterday that she does not believe his case will be effective or ready by the October 2nd date. She said the defense needs more time to review evidence from the state and to complete other processes, including filing motions to strike the death penalty, challenge the grand jury indictment, and banning cameras from the courtroom. Prosecutor Bill Thompson disagreed with Taylor, adding that the state would like to wrap up the trial sooner rather than later. But Judge John Judge said that he understood that the defense wanted to be fully prepared for the trial, and he accepted Coburger's waiver of right to speedy trial. The judge also suggested that a new trial date be set after the next hearing, which is currently scheduled for September 1st. And that hearing will discuss Coburger's motion to dismiss his indictment. The family of Kaylee Goncalves, one of the victims, responded in a statement. They said, upon the court finally putting hard deadlines in place, the family suspected the defendant would waive his speedy trial rights. This case carries enormous weight for the families and the community, and this additional time allows both sides to be fully prepared for the next trial date. So basically what will happen now, Coburger has his next hearing scheduled for September 1st. He's going to try to get his indictment dismissed and strike the death penalty. And it seems like after that hearing, they will try to schedule an actual trial date. But this could drag on for years. With him waiving his right to a speedy trial, it could literally take years until he goes to trial, which is just so frustrating for the families. I'll keep you guys updated.
These are the legs of a 13-year-old child. Swollen, yellow, and twisted, these injuries are not the result of a car crash, a sports injury, or some disease. No, these bruised, broken legs are the result of a deranged madman. He's addicted to the sound of breaking bones and loves inflicting pain on his victims. This is the story of Thaddeus Phillips, the boy who survived the bone breaker. Baraboo, Wisconsin, 1995. It's the night of July 29th, and Thad Phillips is sound asleep. Suddenly, he feels the sensation of being lifted up, but this isn't a dream. It's the beginning of a real-life nightmare. At some point, he realizes that he's being carried through the house, and Thad, who's still half asleep and groggy out of his mind, assumes it's his dad. As he becomes more aware, Thad realizes that he is in the arms of someone he does not know. However, since the mystery man is so friendly, Thad follows him into the night about a mile away to an old rundown house. The stranger introduces himself as Joe and tells Thad that later he's going to have a party, and proceeds to rattle off a few names, some of which the boy recognizes from school. He then follows him up the broken wooden steps, having no idea he is walking into the clutches of a monster. And the moment they step inside the room, Joe, like a light switch, changes from warm and welcoming to crazed and psychotic. He then lifts up Thad and throws him onto a filthy-looking bed, straddles him, and pins his arms at his side. The boy desperately tries to break free, thrashing about wildly, but 90-pound Thad is no match for Joe, who is nearly twice his size. Joe then grabs a hold of the boy's right foot and twists it until... snap. After shattering the boy's leg, Joe lets up a bit, relaxes, and shrugs his shoulders as if to say sorry. The bone breaker continues this cycle for hours on end. And when Thad isn't being abused, Joe actually carries him around the house and they watch TV together and talk about life. And it's during one of these down times that Thad asks Joe why he's doing this to him. Joe tells him that he is fascinated with the sound of bones when they break. Joe further admits that he's actually done this before to 2 other boys. The next morning, after a few hours of watching TV together, Joe, out of nowhere, picks up injured Thad and carries him upstairs to resume brutally breaking down the young boy's body. His left ankle is grabbed and turned in the same way his right one was the day before, until it breaks. Joe then methodically coils the kid's skin until it quite literally looks like there are rubber bands wrapped around his leg, and then he proceeds to twist his foot backwards, pointing in the opposite direction. And when it's over, the boy's thrown into a closet and the door is locked. July 31st, 1996. Almost 43 hours after this unimaginable horror began, Thad is thirsty, hungry, and getting weaker by the second. He thinks that he might be bleeding internally and knows that if he doesn't escape soon, he's gonna die. Eventually, he finds a large wooden guitar and smashes it into the door over and over again until finally it breaks down. He crawls for a bit, passes out, wakes up, does this several more times until finally he reaches the front door by the kitchen. There he spots a telephone mounted on the wall. Thad dials 911 and the dispatcher traces his location and police are sent in to rescue him, and he's rushed to the hospital in critical condition. When he arrives, doctors say that he's in such bad shape that he was just within hours of passing away. His legs no longer look human. They are bruised and swollen beyond recognition. Despite his injuries, when he'd been rushed to the hospital, he'd somehow managed to tell investigators that his captor, now identified as 17-year-old Joe Clark, had in fact done this before. The House of Horrors belongs to his parents, who'd been away visiting his sister. Joe's arrested a few hours later and had been found partying at his girlfriend's house when he's taken into custody. When authorities search Joe's home, they come across something truly terrifying. Inside his bedroom, they find a notebook, and inside is a list of 24 other boys in the area. At the top of each column is a heading, showing when he planned to kidnap a boy and what he wanted to do with him. During Thad's trial, Joe admits to taking Thad, but only to hang out, and had no idea how the boy had been injured because he had quote-unquote blacked out. He pleads not guilty by reason of mental defect. However, the jury doesn't buy it, and Joe Clark is found guilty and sentenced to 100 years in prison.
Today I'm going to tell you about the most gruesome child murder in The Sims 3. Hannah and Aiden Jones inherited Remington's ruse in Riverview after a series of mysterious deaths. Hannah's uncle, Jasper Remington, died of electrocution. His wife, Eileen, died of starvation. Their teen son, Cody, died in a fire, while Kirsten, their young daughter, drowned. Lydia Remington, Hannah's mother, also drowned, but despite haunting the manor, is buried elsewhere. And I believe Lydia murdered her brother's family. Lydia had the technophobe trait, which allowed her to sabotage TVs. Given that Jasper died near a TV and had no friendship with Lydia, lends weight to this possibility. The resulting electrocution started a fire, and Cody lost his life trying to put it out. Unfortunately for Lydia, Eileen and Kirsten survived. Eileen, grief-stricken, refused to eat and quickly faded away from starvation. This left Kirsten the sole heir to Jasper's fortune and in Lydia's care. Lydia couldn't outright kill Kirsten without suspicion, so she did the most horrific thing to ensure Hannah's inheritance. Lydia drove Kirsten and herself into a nearby river, ending both their lives, the evidence of which can still be seen in-game, thus ending one of the most tragic stories in The Sims.
Did you know that a Barbie actually saved lives? In 2018, a terrified 17-year-old Jordan Turpin called 911 saying that she'd escaped her house while several of her siblings remained chained to their beds. What officers uncovered at the Turpin house was a horrific case of abuse. The house was filthy and their 15 kids hadn't bathed in over a year. And several of the Turpin children were so emaciated that they could barely walk. Jennifer and Jordan Turpin described their lives as hell. They weren't allowed to go to school and had to keep curtains on all of the windows since the family was mostly up at night. The parents also used extremely brutal disciplinary tactics like starvation and chaining them up as well as beating them. Louise, the mom, would hoard children's toys that her kids were never allowed to touch. The children also had to ask their parents for food, and they were rarely fed. At the time of their parents' arrest, 2 of the children were chained to their beds for stealing candy. And some of their squalid living conditions and starving children were filmed using Video Girl Barbie. Unbeknownst to her parents who bought her this toy, the doll had a camera in it. And Jordan, the one who escaped, would frequently film videos and post them online. She told Diane Sawyer that one of the commenters asked why she was always up at night and never seemed to go outside. She told them about what was going on in the home, and the commenter told her to call the police. The Turpin kids' ages went all the way up to 29, but they still all lived these sheltered lives. Some of the trusted older kids were given smartphones, and this is what led to Jordan making her escape. Jordan's mom walked in on her watching a Justin Bieber music video and strangled her to the point of unconsciousness, and this is when Jordan knew that she had to leave. In fact, she only knew about 911 from watching the show Cops. And in the early morning hours, she escaped and using her sibling's smartphone was able to call 911.
David and Louise Turpin pled guilty and were sentenced to life in prison. I will truly never understand what could possess parents to do this to their children, and somehow through all of this, David was able to keep a job as a computer engineer. Their parents were obsessed with Disney and children's toys, and Louise had some personality disorders that stemmed from her own childhood abuse. But that does not excuse any of her behavior towards her own children. Neighbors in their California neighborhood reported that the Turpin children seemed pale and malnourished. They also wouldn't speak unless spoken to. Since they were obsessed with Disney and even made a family visit one year, maybe this is what kept neighbors and their outer family from calling the police. It was all some big cover. If you're new here, my name's Sylvia, and thank you for watching my video, and if you like true crime, follow my account.